the hosts or the presenters or myself by clicking the little down arrow next to where it says to. And finally, if you are experiencing any technology issues today, you're gonna message me in the chat like I just described, Mary Kate Lewis, and I will troubleshoot with you as quickly as possible. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll turn it over to our presenters to get started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mary Kate. Hi, everyone. My name is Nkira Aduba. I'm the Capacity Building Manager at CSAJ. We're really excited to have you with us, join us today and join this conversation. Topic is on 2021 child tax credit. We see a lot of you are joining this chat, so I would just hand over to my colleagues to introduce themselves. Please feel free to start introducing yourself in the chat. Natanya.
Hi, my name is Natanya and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the project coordinator of CSAJ, and I will be collecting folks' questions throughout today's call, so feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll be collecting them for our presenters. Thank you.
Erica or Sarah? Okay.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I use she, her pronouns. I'm CSAJ's Director of Research and Programs. I'll be taking notes and just here to help. Really excited that everybody's here to talk tax, talk family law. Let's go. Thank you to everyone.
Hello, everybody. My name is Erica Sussman, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for Survivor Agency and Justice. I use she, her pronouns. I am here as support and to witness all of the brilliance that I'm sure will come out of today's town hall. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everyone. So I'll just start with the brief background on CSAJ's mission and vision, and then allow the experts to introduce themselves. So CSAJ's mission is to promote advocacy approaches that remove systemic barriers, enhance organizational responses, and improve professional practices to meet the self-defined needs of domestic and sexual violence survivors. Our vision at CSAJ is a world where all people have equal access to physical safety, economic security, and human dignity. So on this town hall, we have five wonderful experts, and Natanya has been putting their bios in the chat. Please, could you introduce yourself, starting from Tiffany?
Hello, everybody. My name is Tiffany Jackson, and I'm a social worker. I am the peculiar intersection between domestic violence advocate, and I'm currently an executive director for a nonprofit that does taxes for people that are low and moderate income. As we know, a lot of our survivors fall into that low income bracket because of, consequences of them leaving their partner and trying to rebuild and start over. So I'm here to support in whichever way I can, answer your questions, and learn some things myself.
Thanks. Jamie?
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Jamie Andree. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an attorney with the Indiana Legal Services Low Income Taxpayer Clinic, and I'm also the tax expert for CSAJ. Not surprisingly, my area of expertise is resolving the federal tax problems of low and moderate income taxpayers, with a special emphasis on the tax problems faced by survivors.
Thank you. Laura?
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Laura Russell. I'm the director of the Family Domestic Violence Unit at the Legal Aid Society in New York City. And my specialty is mostly matrimonial law, though I also know a lot of family law, and I handle a lot of cases regarding equitable distribution, which is the distribution of property and assets and debts in a marriage. And so the financial issues really are my expertise.
Thank you, Katie.
Hi, my name is Katie VonDeLinde, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm co-director of KMCV Consulting, and I've been a domestic violence advocate and doing economic work for a long time. So I'm here to really talk to you all about survivor-centered economic advocacy and the entree that child tax credits give us into conversations around economics and economic planning with survivors of intimate partner violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault.
Thank you. Carla?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carla Sanchez-Adams, and I am a managing attorney at RioGrande Legal Aid. And I am on this call to be your consumer attorney, expert advisor, talk about, the mechanics of bank accounts, debts, garnishment, and consumer implications of the child tax credit.
Thanks, everyone. So basically, the way this is going to go is they're going to give as you can tell, it's from 5 different perspectives. So there's the tax perspective from the attorney's perspective and the tax perspective from the advocate's perspective. And then we have the family law perspective as well, consumer law, and survivor-centered economic advocacy perspective. So each of the panelists are going to speak for 5 minutes on just summarizing what they're seeing, challenges, and all of that. And then I'll kick off with a question, 1 question for each of them. And then after that, it's open to questions and comments, but you can already start to put your questions in the chat so that Netanya can curate them. And yeah, looking forward to it. So what we intend to cover in this town hall is the child tax credit. What is it? What's new, who's eligible, the mechanics of claiming it, receiving it, the family law issues with custody, which parent gets it, and then consumer issues like, can this be garnished by companies? And then also the survivor-centered economic advocacy issues with how do you budget for it? How do you advise survivors to use the child tax credit? I will hand over housekeeping issues to Netanya to talk about that before we start.
Yeah, most of it has been covered with the wonderful introduction by Mary Kate, but just put your question in the chat, or if you want it to be anonymous, you could private message it to me also, and then we'll get to them later in the call. Thank you.
Okay. So Jamie, could you start us off with?
Okay, I will do that. I'm going to give you some basic information about the 2021 child tax credit. In general, this credit has been around for a number of years. Before this year, if you were eligible, you could get the child tax credit for qualifying children you claimed as dependents on your tax return, but you had to wait until you filed your tax return to get the credit. The 2021 child tax credit is different in several ways. The biggest change is that part of it can be paid in advance right now. That's the advanced child tax credit. So for many taxpayers, half of their estimated child tax credit for the year is being paid in advance in 6 monthly payments, which started on July 15th of this year. You can notify IRS if you don't want to receive advance payments. And instead, if you're eligible, you can still claim it when you file your 2021 tax return next spring, 2022. There are some other changes besides the payment of the advance credit, including the amount of the credit having increased and the fact that you can get it now even if you have no income. One thing that has not changed: to qualify for the 2021 child tax credit for a specific child, you must be eligible to claim that child as a dependent on your 2021 tax return and actually do so when you file the return. And this is really important. So that means that the child must have lived with you for more than half of 2021, unless you're a non-custodial parent who's gotten the signed IRS Form 8332 from the custodial parent, allowing you to claim the child for the year. So one of the significant issues is that the advanced child tax credit is being paid out now before anyone has filed their 2021 tax return. IRS really doesn't know who can or who will claim a child for 2021 until it actually gets the 2021 tax return in 2022. So how does IRS know who to send the advanced child tax credit to? Well, when Congress created the advanced child tax credit, it provided the sole mechanisms that IRS can use to determine who's going to get this advance payment. And here's what they are. If a taxpayer filed a 2020 tax return and IRS processed the return and isn't auditing it, then IRS is going to send that taxpayer the 2021 advanced child tax credit for qualifying children claimed as dependents on that 2020 tax return. If no 2020 return was filed, then IRS will look at the 2019 tax return. IRS was also authorized to pay the advanced child tax credit to taxpayers for a specific dependent if they included information about that dependent using, and some of you should remember this, the non-filer tool for economic impact payments. That was the tool on the IRS website where you could sign up to get stimulus payments. And if you listed a dependent as residing with you, then IRS should be sending advanced child tax credit payments to you for that dependent. There's also a new non-filer tool that you can use to sign up for the advanced child tax credit if you didn't have a filing obligation for 2020 and you didn't file a 2020 return and you don't plan to. And there's a link to that child tax credit non-filer sign-up tool in the chat. And then finally, you can still file a 2020 tax return electronically if you haven't yet filed one. So one big problem that we are all seeing when using 2020 or 2019 tax return information to issue the advanced tax credit, child tax credit, IRS is using information that is old, 1 or 2 years old. And just because a taxpayer qualified to claim a child as a dependent in 2020 doesn't mean that that child has lived with that taxpayer at all in 2021 or can be claimed as a dependent for 2021. Congress didn't authorize the IRS to investigate a taxpayer and a child's circumstances now. So for example, if my child's other parent is getting the advanced child tax credit for my child, who's been in my custody since November 2020, I can't call IRS and get IRS to do anything about it now. IRS doesn't have any authority to do anything about it now. There are some things that I can do in this situation. I can ask my child's other parent to unenroll from getting the child tax credit using the update portal so that I can sign up to get the credit. But unfortunately, a lot of parents are going to refuse to do that. I can also ask my child's parents to turn over the advanced child tax credit or a portion of what they're receiving for my child to me. But obviously that isn't going to work very well either. There may be a family court solution, which will be discussed by another panelist. But ultimately, I probably won't be able to get the advanced child tax credit if someone else is getting it for my child right now. But if I claim my child as a dependent when I finally file my 2021 tax return next spring, and my child and I otherwise meet the qualifications, then finally I will get it, the advanced child tax or the child tax credit for 2021 in 2022, kind of the old-fashioned way, the way we used to get the child tax credit for prior years. And that's even if someone else has already gotten it. Now, the last thing I want to say is at this time, if no one else is receiving the advanced child tax credit for your child, there are still some things you can do. If you haven't done so, you can file your 2020 tax return electronically. The deadline for electronic filing of a 2020 tax return is October 15th of this year. If you file before that date, IRS can start paying you monthly payments of the advanced child tax credit for any child under 18 you claimed as a dependent. Filing on paper is going to take too long to process, so that won't work. Or you can use the new child tax credit non-filer sign-up tool.
Thanks so much, Jamie. So I think, Tiffany, we want to hear from you on the advocate's perspective, tax advocate's perspective.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Jamie. You did a fantastic job of giving everybody all the information and some of my information too.
Say it again, Tiffany.
Well, I do want to say this tool, this has been so far very beneficial for a lot of the clients that we have and a lot of the families that we've worked with. Again, it's a personal choice because, as Jamie said, this is a credit that parents and families have been getting and have been eligible for each tax season. But this way they'll be able to get half. So depending on the family income and the age of the child, families can get up to $1,800 for a child before December hits. And so that's a good thing. Well, after their December payment, but that's a good thing. And that's been pretty beneficial for families. So that is good. And so it's a personal choice for people to use that. One of the challenges and one of the big questions that I've been getting a lot has been about overpayment. And will people have to pay any of this money back when they file their taxes? As Jamie said, the information for these payments is based off of 2019 in some cases and 2020 tax returns. So a lot can change during those times. For instance, a kiddo could age up, which means they're eligible for less money. Or they can age out of the bracket, but they're still getting the payments. And there have been times when that has happened as well. Or a family's income can increase significantly. So the portal on the IRS website, that too, you can go in and update your income if you'd like to. If you have a new AGI, you got a better job and you're earning significantly more, that might be beneficial to go in there and to update that. That would also help you do a calculator for your taxes. But another thing to remember is you're only getting half of the payment. So unless it's a gross overpayment, the likelihood that you will have to pay is a little slim. You might not get as much in refund, if you have received those payments, but you're not eligible any longer based on the old tax information they're using. So that's something to note, but it's still, again, a good benefit. Another thing that's important and that has been beneficial for one of our clients is that you can unenroll in these payments on the tool now. So now you can go on the website and unenroll. Unfortunately, if you do that, you can't re-enroll at this time. But if you say, hey, I've gotten a couple of the payments, I'm not going to use them or don't want them for whichever reason, you can go on and go ahead and unsubscribe so that you will not be getting those payments anymore. And you could claim the rest of your payment when you do your taxes. One example that we had was somebody who had a joint bank account, but they moved from their partner. And so this person moved into a shelter. So what they did was, this was the person, the bank account was in this person's name, but the partner did have access to this account. So the person wanted to get a check, just get a paper check. They closed the account and they were getting a paper check, but guess where the paper check was going? Right, to the address that was on file, which was the old house. So what was beneficial for this person was to go ahead and just unenroll in the payments and wait to get that tax credit at the end. So when they filed their taxes in the beginning of 2020, to go ahead and get the rest of the payments at that time. So it's been beneficial in that way. Another challenge that we've hit was that we had someone who was going through the identity theft process. And unfortunately, if you're going through the identity theft process, until that's resolved, they will not issue payments. And so their payments were stopped. And that was a survivor also. And it was identity theft from a previous partner. And so she wasn't able to get the payments at that time either. So those are a couple of the things that have happened and that we've worked through. One of the things, that tool to unenroll or to update information, is going to be really helpful and useful There's no limit on the amount of times you can go and log on there. You can update addresses on the tool. You can, change from direct deposit to a mail check. So that's really going to be a great option. And that's something that's been very helpful for our clients.
That's great. Now we want to hear from our family law expert. What are you seeing?
Hi, everyone. So this is somewhat of I would argue, a new area for family law experts. I mean, obviously the child tax credit and the tax deduction of the past, which was not only worth less, but also many times our clients wouldn't be able to get the full benefit. In past, we would always argue, maybe one side can have it, maybe the non-custodial parent can take it in exchange for something, because it might be worth more for the non-custodial parent than it would be for the custodial parent. And we're seeing a lot of those stipulations revisited, because now it's worth more for both parents. And for the custodial parent, who might have been the lower earner spouse, it's worth a lot more than it has in the past. So the first thing I would say is that what we're doing with clients who call us is really looking at their agreements, whether they be orders or stipulations, and seeing exactly what they say. For example, a lot of our stipulations talk about how one party can claim the benefit only if they're current in child support. So there's an argument that benefit doesn't go to that party unless they're current in child support. And in many of our cases, for some reason, no one is ever current in child support. So, so we see that happen a lot. We're also seeing a lot of situations where if the parties are living together or were living together and have separated and a divorce is going on, that instead of arguing which parent gets that additional money, we're using it to pay down some marital debt that might otherwise be problematic in the future. So if there's a joint credit card and you can use it to pay down that joint credit card, if that joint credit card had to be paid down anyway, it's a good way to start extricating yourself from your partner, especially in financial ways. We're also using it for other forms of equitable distribution. Just again, when you're looking at situations where parties may have been together and both parties are therefore raising the child, but have subsequently separated. Our biggest argument, what we are using it, is arguing that it is child support. And as child support, it should go to the custodial parent. So when you're not in a marital situation, when you're not getting a divorce, when the parties are living separate and apart, even if the stipulations say who can claim the child and who can't, we're arguing that this is a change in circumstance to those stipulations, and therefore that it should go to the custodial parent. If you look at the press releases around the child tax credit, if you look at what Congress has said about it, the idea was to help parents taking care of their children, and we've utilized that in arguing that it should go to the custodial parent. Now, of course, going to one parent and where it actually went and trying to get it back are slightly different things. And so what we are arguing is that we are bringing actually violations of child support if the custodial parent is not getting the money back, arguing that the non-custodial parent didn't have a right to it and they should have either given it to the custodial parent or not accepted it from the IRS if there was a situation like Tiffany and Jamie spoke about, where one party could stop payments of it. So, so we have brought cases, both New York is split. There's a Supreme Court that does divorces and a family court that does everything but divorces. So in both courts, we're arguing that it is a violation of child support for the non-custodial parent to be accepting this. Judges are split on what they're doing with this, and I think every jurisdiction is very different, and we're going to see a lot of case law from every jurisdiction on this issue, especially because the interplay between family law and the tax code is also very difficult, to say the least. The tax code is federal, and there's a cases from various jurisdictions that say that a state court cannot say who is going to get, or how someone is going to be claimed in their taxes. But that being said, all the case law points that if there is a tax benefit that is supposed to go to one parent and has not gone to that parent, that is arguably contempt of court and a violation of a support or order or a judgment of divorce. So I'm interested to hear from you, which we will do later on. And I'm also interested to hear what's going on in your jurisdictions. But I will say there are a lot of arguments for why these resources and financial resources should be going to the custodial parent, not just the person who might be claiming the child for that year. So,
Laura, there are just two specific, I think, clarifications of what you were just explaining that I think we should take now, since they're not, whole situation questions. But there is a question about what the likelihood of this format to stick around is, and clarification, the custodial parent can opt out even if non-custodial claim the child on 2020-2019 taxes, ?
So I think this is more a Jamie or Tiffany question, but the IRS is going to recognize the person who they're giving it to, not so much who's the custodial parent, because the IRS doesn't really know who the custodial parent is. They only know who's actually getting who claimed the child as a dependent. So so they can only opt out if they've been the one who have been claiming the child. And so you're correct, you can't opt out if you're not the one who was claiming the child in the past. As for this being extended, I have read the same news stories that you have, so I'm optimistic, but I don't know specifically whether it will be not suspended, will be continued. So.
Thank you. So Katie, what's the survivor-centered economic advocacy perspective on the Ctcs?
All right, thanks everybody. Well, first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge how exciting it is that everybody is here. This is a really complex topic. Obviously, a lot of us have a lot of interest. And I don't know if you're like me, as soon as I hear Jamie and Laura and Tiffany start talking, my heart starts pounding as a reminder of like, oh my goodness, this is all a lot. And that we don't need to know it all. So we are learning, and it's a learning process. And as advocates, we're really good at learning as we go, and that we realize we don't have to know all the answers that Jamie knows, that Laura knows, that Tiffany know, but we just have to walk along the process with the survivor. And so that may mean going back to our notes or emailing people or looking up Google, and that just so that we can all take a deep breath and realize as we learn through this process, it's going to be getting more and more information as we go along. So I am really here today excited, as I said earlier, that the child tax credit really gives us a way into some of these economic conversations that I find essential for doing work with survivors of intimate partner violence. And it really gets us an opportunity to start asking questions about survivors' financial situations and how their financial situation is impacted by their current or former partner. So my real hope is that through these conversations, we can talk about survivors' hopes, dreams, fears, and goals when it comes to money, and get beyond our own hesitancy sometimes about asking questions, because we know that we have a lot of our own fears about money, and maybe we don't know all the answers, just like we don't know all the answers about taxes. And sometimes that leaves us being stuck. We also know that a lot of the survivors we work with have a lot of trauma around money and around taxes and who's getting payment. And so sometimes we are afraid to ask some questions or look into that, what else is going on. But we also know that as advocates, we oftentimes have a lot of ideas about how we think survivors should be spending money that they're getting, especially when they're receiving services like shelter or transitional housing. So it's my hope that here, as we start seeing survivors potentially getting some access to the child tax credits, that we can focus our advocacy on what survivors may want and may need, so that we can come to the space non-judgmentally to have the conversation. So what I think is important is to understand what has worked and what hasn't worked for survivors in their economic planning in the past, So we all know that many of our survivors get tax refunds. They may get those, in advance. They maybe get them at a different time. So this is just another opportunity to start talking about and having conversations about how do we budget when we get lumps of money, especially for folks who have maybe not had access to money or not been able to make choices about money. So we oftentimes see the situation where survivors get this access, get a chunk of money, and spend that money in a way that maybe as an advocate we don't feel comfortable with, or we wish it was spent in a different way. So I think it's helpful, instead of coming from that frame of reference, to understand why survivors may be looking at this money and trying to figure out what the best is and what the best strategy is for their family. And maybe taking away our judgmental things and thinking about understanding that survivors, as they're having additional income for the first time, might purchase some things that we consider unnecessary, and that's okay. So then we can frame our conversations to say things like, for lots of us, when we have been working hard and to make it financially month to month, it feels like a relief to get some extra money. And it's okay to want to spend some of that to buy something for our families that we usually can't. The important thing is to think about a plan for how we want to spend the money. And part of that plan around the additional income might be doing something like taking your kids out to eat once a month. So having those really explicit conversations about that. I think the other thing for us to remember as survivor-centered advocates is that the child tax credits are not considered income, so they don't impact eligibility for other assistance programs. So just to remember that we're still helping folks if they want to have access to programs like TANF or other food stamps, other things. So to me, this really helps us think about what are some of the good open-ended questions for survivors. Things like, what do I need to pay off? What expenses keep coming up for me that I can't cover? What costs would it help to cover in the short term? What costs would it help to cover in the long term? So that we can really use this information to create a meaningful cost of living plan alongside with survivors so they can have their plan to live and survive. So I'm going to potentially answer some more of these questions later, but I'm going to put a link in there to a newsletter that CSAJ put out last year about kind of thinking about priorities with money in times of COVID and how COVID might have changed some of our priorities. And hopefully later we'll also get to talk about some more kind of thinking as we're trying to decide with survivors, walking with them through that process about where they are going to put that child tax credit income when and if they do get access to that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katie. That was a lot of very interesting information. Move on to Carla, who's going to talk from the consumer law perspective.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of what Katie was discussing with being survivor-centered and that approach. And part of that is not just what will the money go to, but how to protect that money so it doesn't go to things we don't want it to go to. Right. So, part of the strategy behind the child tax credits is that it is protected from garnishment for debt owed to the federal government or state government. So it cannot be garnished for example, if they owe past tax debt, or if they owe money because of student loans to the federal government, or for any other money that might be owed. But it's not protected from garnishment from private creditors. So one of the that can mean the consumer, the survivor, has a judgment to collect. And so if they have that and there's garnishment order, they can seize those funds. Or if, depending on what your state is and the protections in your state, it is not protected. And so if your consumer, which happens a lot with our consumer survivors, if their bank account is overdrawn, for example, that money goes direct deposit into that account, that's going to be a chunk of money that is taken, the bank keeps, essentially. So some of the recommendations that we have, there's some other challenges as well with just banks in general. So what if the survivor and the former abuser who are getting, filed 2019 or 2020 joint tax returns in a joint account, and now it's going to be deposited into that joint account? Or what if, there's some issues there, which is why that tool that was mentioned earlier to change that address is super important. But also, what to do if you get a check and are trying to deposit that check into an account, and it has both the survivor and the abuser's name on it. what can you do, in those scenarios to get the bank to actually take the money? Because I have heard from some that the bank won't accept it unless it's endorsed by both parties. So that shouldn't be a problem, and that shouldn't be a challenge if you deposit it electronically. So some of the challenges with that, and I'll take a step back, is that where is the survivor banking, right? So sometimes there's credit unions, sometimes they don't have a bank account. And so one of the things that we highly recommend is this website that you can go to. It's joinbankon.org, or you can just Google Bank On. It's a recommendation of several banks that provide bank accounts to consumers who have had either past bad history because they've overdrafted accounts and had closed accounts. So they, they're just, and they're online, so you can deposit checks online. So you take a picture of it through an app or do it online. And generally when you do that, you don't need the endorsement of two parties, just one party. So if I have a check that is written to, both me and my husband, and I just sign it myself, not a problem when you deposit it online. So that's one way around it. But the good thing about this, from again the consumer perspective and of protecting those funds and those striving towards survivor-centered economic advocacy and security, is that as I'm sure some know, but I don't know if it's been explicitly mentioned, is that the child tax credit will not count against public benefits. So it won't count as income, and so won't bump someone off public benefits if they're getting them now. But one thing that is important to keep in mind is, even though the child tax credits, the advance payments, are protected from garnishment, tax refunds are not. So if they are not getting that, if they choose not to get the monthly and to choose just to get one, tax refund, then that actually can get offset for garnishment for any debt owed to the federal or state government. So that's another thing to just keep in mind when you are planning with the consumer, what is the best choice for you right now, about whether we want to do advanced payments now or do just one refund. Where do we want those advance payments to go? By check, by direct deposit, and to what account, and all these different things. And so I will be here to answer any questions that you may have relating to like bank accounts generally or consumer debt generally. But that's all I have for my portion.
Thanks, Carla. So now we move on to the section where we ask the tax experts some of the questions that we got from the registrants and all of that. So I don't know if Jamie could give us a general overview. Well, you gave us some general overview of the CTC. If you have more information to share, and then also one of the questions. So a general overview of the CTC, if you haven't, if there's some places you haven't covered. And then an additional question is, what are the advantages to getting monthly versus waiving this to receive regular tax filing?
Okay. Well, I did give some basic information about the child tax credit. And one of the things I'd like to make a pitch for is on irs.gov. IRS has put together some FAQs all about the child tax credit and the advanced child tax credit. And, they're really pretty well organized. They get updated periodically. And I would encourage you to take a look at those for just some basic information. So the question about, and Carla did touch on quite a bit of this, but I might have a few more things to say about, what you should take into account when deciding whether to get the advanced child tax credit or wait and receive it when you file your 2021 tax return. There are a lot of different considerations, and it's really hard to generalize. But as Carla said, and I just want to repeat this, one advantage to getting it in advance, and you're only going to get half in advance, or an estimate of what half would be, is that it can't be offset to pay any tax you owe or any debt you owe the state or the federal government or unpaid child support. But if you get it as a refund, the whole thing as a refund in 2021, then it's not going to be protected. The refund and any part of the child tax credit that's included in that refund is not going to be protected from offset. And then after it's paid to you, it may be subject to garnishment by creditors, depending on the laws in your state. You know, for people who need the assistance right now, that's certainly a consideration to seek the advanced child tax credit. Keep in mind that whatever you get now in 2021, you're going to have to reconcile that with the amount that you're entitled to get on your 2021 tax return. So if you got less during this year than the total you're going to be entitled to, you'll get the balance on your future tax return. But if you get more now than you would be entitled to get, there are some repayment rules, but repayment is required, except there are repayment protections that may excuse people from repayment, some or all of the excess that they got. And, you know, if you're a relatively low income taxpayer, and you know, you did claim the child, say, on your 2020 tax return, and that's why you started getting it, and your income's pretty low, you're likely to get repayment excused. But it's a formula, and you have to look at that. And it is discussed in the FAQs. You know, if you're a taxpayer who is self-employed and you're not making your required estimated tax payments, and you usually end up owing IRS, if you get the advanced child tax credit, you may, and you get more than you're entitled to, you may end up with a bigger tax bill than you otherwise would. So that's what you want to factor that in. And if your income in 2021 is substantially larger than your income was, say, in 2020 or 2019, if that return was part of how IRS estimated how much you were going to get. If your income increased substantially, or you have fewer children, qualifying children who live with you, or for some reason you were in the United States in 2020, but your main home was outside the US for more than half of 2021, those are examples of people who might benefit from unenrolling now from the advanced payment, and then claiming the child tax credit if it turns out they're eligible on their 2020 returns. And I guess the last thing is, some people who don't have an immediate need for the extra cash right now, you know, a lot of people use their tax refund as kind of a savings account. And, you know, you may get a larger refund, you will get a larger refund or owe less tax when you file your 2021 tax return if you unenroll from the advanced child tax credit right now. So those are the considerations that I can think of.
Thanks, Jamie. So Tiffany, there's a question about difficulty accessing IRS portal due to ID.me verification. How do you navigate ID.me? Could you speak on that? And then for the rest of us, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
Cross your fingers and hope for the best. So unfortunately, because this is new, the IRS has encountered several issues. So we meet monthly, and they just rolled this portal out. So this just became available at the end of this summer. So there's really not much that you can do except for trial and error. Just keep checking back and working through it. You can call. Some of the offices are very backlogged and swamped, but I just advocate for calling early and as much as possible. You know, if you get somebody who's not particularly helpful, just go back. Unfortunately, that is going to be the best strategy for getting through, because there are challenges with the portal. So there's just got to cross your fingers and try it the next day. But the one really positive thing is that I have worked with somebody who's had significant challenges getting their ID and being able to use that. And then probably about 3 days later, they were able to use it again. So it's a lot of glitches, a lot of things to work out. So just for you, just encourage patience, and as an advocate, just kind of model that yourself. Model that yourself, and just it's a great tool to help your clients to be able to navigate systems, I guess, in a way. So that's the best answer I have for that. There's no magic about that.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if it's better to do it in the morning or in the night, or is there a time that the thing works?
It has crashed. I think that was last week. There were so many people on at one time. So there's another thing. If you are going to unenroll, you have to do it by a certain date. I think it's like the third Thursday of the month. So for instance, for this September payment that goes tomorrow, you would have had to unenroll at the end of August. So you would have had to unenroll by the 30th. So usually those dates are really, really high dates of traffic, and usually something happens on those dates. So you have a hard time getting through when information is not as fluid and as good and easily accessible as it is. So it usually crashes on that day. Sorry, IRS. Don't show this to them, please.
Thanks, Tiffany. So we have one question in the chat. I think this is related to Bank On. So Carla, I think this is for you. So from Andrea Miller, it says, in the past, opening an account at one of the participating banks through Bank On required completion of a short workshop FinEd course. Is that still the requirement?
I'm having a hard time hearing, because I'm on my phone. The audio is cutting off, but I think what I heard was that someone said there was a requirement for completing a course before being a Bank On participant, and asking whether that's still a requirement. As far as I know, yes, but email me separately to see, because sometimes as far as like cost and waiver and all of that, I want to track if that's an issue for low income clients, if they can't pay for something and it's a requirement, because I also should have said that I'm of counsel for the National Consumer Law Center. And so they work on these issues and they work with Bank On. So I want to highlight and flag those. If you want to email me separately and we can discuss some of that, then feel free to do that.
Okay, and then I have one general question for you. Are there any potential consumer rights matters that attorneys should be and advocates should be on the lookout for with the CTC? Scam CTC.
Sorry, say that again. Is there any
potential consumer rights matters related to the CTC that attorneys and advocates should be on the lookout for?
Sorry, 1 second. Can you ask another question? My son just came into the room. He's homesick, so I'll be right back. I'm gonna get him upstairs, and then I'll answer your question. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. So I think I'll move on to Katie. I want to know how advocates can support those with an influx of income. Like, how can you prioritize using it? Do you have any budgeting tips?
Sure. So, I mean, my number one budgeting tip is always just to talk and ask questions and try to figure out and understand what folks need. And so, generally, when I start working with folks around money and doing our economic planning, it's trying to first figure out what people need to survive and how much is it costing them to survive. So if we're thinking about what to do with the child tax credit, our first question is what are your essential family needs? How are you taking care of housing? What does medical costs look like? And for many of the folks that we're working with, even if they're currently being able to pay those costs, there are times of the year that those costs become prohibitive or unable to pay. So then it's trying to get money here and ask for some money here. So some of the conversations might be about also, can some of this child tax credit money go into prepaying some of those essential costs that may be upcoming, especially for folks who know if I have money in my pocket or in my bank, then it's gone. And that a lot of us are like that, right? So having those conversations and understanding about that with survivors, there may be places like child care centers that may be willing to prepay, or maybe some landlords, if it's somewhere that somebody thinks that they're going to stay. There's always challenges there if something came up, but that might be something that we're taking care of, is how can we make sure those essential needs and those essential costs are being taken care of. And then it may be also kind of our next conversations is then what may be this next step is, if we have those costs covered, those essential costs, are there other essential things that need to be paid back? That this money could be saved to put towards. So if somebody has child support that's due, if they have court costs, if they have taxes that are otherwise going to be, so looking at those essential payback items is something that we talk about with survivors. And then after some of those things are taken care of, looking at more like less essential debt that may be coming up for the survivor. Of course, this is always challenging if the person's in the middle of divorce, then Laura might have some conversations about that. But thinking about if there's not a divorce and there's some debt that is there, it's not coerced, that may be a good time to pay off some of the big debts that are costing folks. I always like when I'm working with folks about talking about paying off debt, doing some debt calculators, because we can see if we put this big chunk of $300 or something towards this, maybe this credit card debt that somebody has, how that will lower their interest and how that will lower their costs over the years. And that is a very essential tool oftentimes for us to think of, like, oh yeah, maybe paying $10 or $15 back a month is going to cost me so much more in the long run. So I think those are the things that I'd want to be talking about. And then after those things are taken care of, thinking about what might help have this money be put towards something that could increase income in the future or reduce spending. So for example, does it make sense to look at transportation costs and looking at purchasing a car? What are the pros and cons of doing all of those things? And then finally, after that's taken care of, thinking about potentially putting money aside, looking at banking options, saving options. In your community, if you have an individual development account program where folks can save and have that savings matched, how amazing would it be to say, hey, let's put this, what do you think about putting this $300 in this match savings program, so that could be matched by another $300 to save for the future. So I think having those really detailed conversations about what people need in their lives, what they want, and how they can create a cost of living plan that works for them, that this child tax credit really brings up this conversation, especially for folks that may not have an extra $300 to $1,800 a month that they didn't have in the past.
Thanks. So let's go back to Carla, if you're available, if your son has allowed you to be available with us, or maybe he wants to join the conversation. So I was asking, are there any potential consumer rights law matters that we should be aware of as advocates and attorneys?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges with this conversation is that, it's a beautiful challenge, I think, is that being holistic is really important. And so what I mean by that is a lot of the things that Katie was talking about are tied to consumer rights. So when you're thinking about, okay, I have this money, maybe I want to buy a car. Okay, well, how do you buy a car? What are the best practices in buying a car to avoid fraud, to avoid, there's consumer protection statutes in place to protect survivors so they don't enter really bad loans, right? Or high cost loans or things like that. So, as well as like, is their credit really bad? If their credit's really bad, they're going to have high interest loans. And so knowing some of that when you're doing this, financial planning with the survivor is understanding the interplay of debt and credit and the laws that protect survivors. Aside from that, really the main thing is just figuring out, so much of it is figuring out the financial health of the survivor currently, right? So figuring out what debt they currently have, what their goals are, everything that Katie mentioned, because If they have debt and debt that is already in garnishment, for example, you want to protect that money. So that's as far as consumer rights, how can I protect this from garnishment if they already have a judgment against them? If they have a bankruptcy plan, for example, a Chapter 13, which is different from a 7 liquidation, is that going to affect their payment plan? Can they pay down some of that? So thinking about the whole financial picture and figuring out which consumer laws interplay with those. And it may be that, if you're not an attorney, you're just an advocate, then consulting with an attorney or referring them to an attorney who can think through some of these things. If they're already in collections, they already have debt. If they're not in collections, they don't have a suit, they don't have debt, things like that. I think the main thing is going to be some of the credit and credit reporting aspects. And so that means that, if do they have a bank account? Are they able to get a bank account? Do they have housing issues? Because that's another big one, right? So if they can't get housing because they owe past judgment, like they have an eviction judgment or past rental debt, you may want to prioritize that and think about what protections they may have in the credit reporting space, because so much of getting rental depends on your tenant screening background report, which is a credit report. So figuring out, can I use some of the money to help that so I can get stable housing? So there's just a lot of, this area of law, consumer law, is very broad. And so when you ask me that question, I'm like, well, it just depends, like any good lawyer would answer, right? So yeah, I would say that just that whole picture of financial planning and getting a good picture of the health or not of the survivor, and then seeing what options, do I need to get an attorney here, or can I do some of this, or refer them to some credit counseling. So yeah, that's my roundabout answer for you.
Thanks for that. So moving on to Laura, the family law perspective. Just a question, we got a ton of questions related to custody issues, who gets the CTC and stuff. I wonder if you could speak more to that. And also, is there anything being done to educate judges on the fact that people's things are going to the wrong places, and what work can you be doing with judges that would help survivors when it comes to CTC?
Well, the first thing to remember is that the tax code is very specific about who gets to claim children when you're in some kind of shared custody. And it basically says that the person who has the child the majority of the time is the one who gets the deduction. Now, that deduction can be given away via the signing of a form if you agree to it. But, in my circumstances, for my clients, I'm not going to give that deduction away if they're the custodial parents unless I'm getting something in its place, whether it's a portion of the money that's coming in that my client might not get because of her, her salary or income, or whether it's some, higher amount of child support that they're going to get through the year. So my first comment would be, if you're representing the custodial parent, you don't have to put in the stipulation who gets the child for the deduction, because you will. And a lot of attorneys don't recognize that. I've had a lot of situations, unfortunately, where attorneys will call me up and say, oh, we got to talk about the deduction. And I'm like, well, my client has custody. What's to talk about? And they'll be like, well, but, I said, we settled the case. You didn't bring it up then. I'm not going to bring it up for you now. And as for the judiciary, I think it is something to think about, where the tax code, again, very clear on this, who gets the child. The custodial parent gets the child. If you have an actual shared custody agreement, then look at how many nights the child is with that parent. It's spelled out in the IRC, the code. And a lot of judges don't know that. They read the second part of that, which is whoever pays more money gets the deduction. But that is only a tiebreaker when you literally have a 50-50 physical custody split. It's not a tiebreaker in any other time. So that is a key to educating the judiciary, because they don't really understand deductions. First of all, a lot of them don't understand the tax code. Everybody will argue that they became lawyers, so they never had to do math and never had to look at taxes. So I'll start with that. But aside from that, the judges don't understand the tax code either. And I'm sure Jamie and Tiffany could quote me the exact code number, but it's pretty much black and white. So that's something that everyone who is doing this should think about. And then the second thing to think about is, under the prior tax changes, where they gutted a lot of money you could get back for having children, they're putting money back in. And so there were many times when we were under the prior changes, when we were arguing for deductions that were meaningless based on our clients' incomes, just because they didn't realize that the tax code had changed. So now we're going back to arguing because they might actually be worth something. So when you're talking about it in a child support or custody perspective, the other thing is to really know what you're talking about. And not only by what you're talking about, I mean how much you're talking about. Not this particular code also has an income guideline, and most of our clients don't hit that, but the other side sometimes might. And so the question always is it worth, are you fighting over something that's worth it to give away? And if the other side is so adamant on getting it, showing to them that they're really not going to get very much and it's not worth it to fight is also another mechanism. And there are if you're not connected to a low-income tax center, there are a lot of online tools where you can just have a general idea of how much this entire package of deductions is worth for someone, and whether it's even worth it to have the conversation. So those are kind of some tips that I would recommend. Definitely educate the judiciary. Do not educate your adversary unless you're the non-custodial, representing the non-custodial parent. So.
Thanks for that, Laura. So I have a general question that anyone can answer. Well, I have two different questions. I have one related to how to better assist. So for parents who are undocumented, it's been a challenge to get the child tax credit for US born kids. Can you explain the process? Like, can any of our panelists explain the process to make it more accessible for them?
I can say a few words about that. So undocumented taxpayers can be eligible for both the child tax credit and the advanced child tax credit. The parent or the taxpayer has to either have a social security number that's valid for employment, which a lot of undocumented taxpayers would not be likely to have, or an ITIN, which is an individual taxpayer identification number, in order to claim the child tax credit. And the child for whom they're claiming it, each child they're claiming as a dependent would have to have what's called the social security number valid for employment, in order to be a qualifying child. The challenge, of course, is getting the ITIN in time. Typically, when we're helping taxpayers obtain an ITIN, you prepare the tax return for them, you prepare the ITIN application, and you collect up from the taxpayer all of the various documents that IRS requires, and then you submit it to the particular unit at IRS that's responsible for processing these things. And after a period of time, when they have the taxpayer's original documents, some of which are things like passports and stuff like that, they send that stuff back to you with an assigned number. It actually can work pretty smoothly. Right now, for the 2021 child tax credit, the taxpayer is going to have an undocumented taxpayer is going to have an ITIN issued before the end of this year in order to qualify for this year's child tax credit. It's not too late to apply, but it takes a while. The other thing is there was some kind of a weird glitch. It was sort of an undescribed glitch that IRS had in processing the advanced child tax credit for people with ITINs. That has, it's my understanding from materials put out by IRS that glitch, that undescribed glitch, has been fixed, and that for somebody who missed a payment because of the glitch, they will get that monthly payment as well. So hopefully that's sufficient to answer your question.
Thanks a lot for that. So now I'm opening it up to anyone who has any questions, would like to come off camera, show us your beautiful face. And if you have any question for any of the panelists, or just if you also want to share any challenges or what you're seeing, anything like that, would be really welcome.
There is a question in the chat about how to prove a child is living with a parent and whether you can look at court documents. So I'll briefly just say, because I've done a few of these. What I do with my clients is if I have an order of custody, obviously I'm going to produce that. But they also want to look at school records, public benefits records, Medicaid and health insurance records. They're really looking for something that proves that the child's address and the filer's address is the same. And so it's literally a letter. I don't do tax law, but I will say that I have a tax attorney review my letter, but it's literally a letter with a copy of all those documents. But Jamie, you might want to add to that.
Well, I agree with what Laura said. Some of the practical things that I have found helpful, since you're trying to convince IRS that the child spent more than half the year with your client, you may want to submit records like medical records from March and from July and from October, all of whom have the child's name on it and your client's address. IRS will take all kinds of weird things. I have submitted in these situations in exams email from the other parent raging about the fact that my client has allowed the 16-year-old to move into their house in defiance of the custody order. And I had hundreds of these emails that I submitted to IRS, and they were convinced that, in fact, regardless of what the divorce decree said, my client actually had the kid. Letters addressed to the child, postmarked envelopes at the parent's address, birthday cards, that kind of thing, if people hang on to it. I also tell my clients, keep a calendar, okay, of when the child is with you. A contemporaneous calendar won't be dispositive for IRS, but it can make a difference. And so, a certain amount of creativity in digging for documents is really helpful. Court records, if the child's been, involved in the court system, or, that kind of thing. Anything like that indicates where the child is located is useful. But IRS isn't bound by court documents saying that, the other parent is
When we use a budgeting app.
Sorry,
Hi,
Jamie,
can I-
finished?
I finished.
Okay, thank you. Sahar, could you repeat your question? I hope I said your name correctly. I heard something budgeting. Do you want to come on again? No? Okay. You can always put your question in the chat. There's a question here that says,
I think I saw Kirsten raise their hand.
Okay.
I did. I can put it in the. I started entering the chat. I'll go ahead and read it.
No, just okay. No, please just don't put it in chat. We would like to see someone else talk. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm interested. There are proposals for the legislation that would continue the CTC for the next 5 years. And one of them is not requiring the claimant to be the primary caretaker. So that it would require someone who claims a child for the CTC care for the child to some degree and live with the kid. It doesn't require that they be related to the kid. So a concern is that this opens the door for an abuser who's not a parent to claim the child. And if they were married, that always would have been an option that they might have to fight. But now does it make it even more, would that make it easier for an abusive partner to claim the credit?
I mean, I think it potentially could. I mean, abusive parents can abusive partners can be related to the child or not related to the child. But I guess I'm not sure what the sort of the purpose of that language would be.
So the goal isn't, and I'd welcome other suggestions. The goal of the change, some of the changes, is that the money should follow the child, and there are some really good things about that. But then there are also, for some of the moms that we obviously focus on so much, there are some things that are potentially really harmful about that. So, you know, we're thinking about if mom loses custody because she can't support her family and the CTC would allow her to, we don't want the CTC to go to foster parents when it could support her, or you know, kids coming out of juvenile justice, or kids who are staying with kin. So that's the idea. But then it really comes down, we're trying to grapple with, from a survivor perspective, is it better that the parent, what is most protective of survivors in getting to keep their kids and claim the credit?
I don't know the answer to that question, and I think that there are probably people who have better experience than I do on this call who might be able to answer it. But I do want to raise one thought, which is right now it's being administered through the tax system, and you know, having money follow the child is a little bit like having you know, a public benefit that's less like a tax benefit, but more like SNAP benefits or Medicaid. You know, the child gets it, and whoever happens to be taking care of the child maybe has the ability to manage it for the child. But I think what you have to kind of be thinking about is this an income support program that operates outside of the tax system, or is this a tax benefit? And maybe that will sort of help your thinking. I don't know. I haven't really thought about the question that you're asking, but.
Okay.
I mean, I would, my first comment is the tax code, the way you do taxes is already in the past. So custody is extremely fluid, and it can change very, very rapidly. But you're basing a benefit on something that happened at a minimum, you know, a couple months ago, if not a couple, like 8, 13 or 14 months ago. So that, putting it in the tax code, that's the first problem. And there's no mechanism in the tax code to fix that, to say, you know, oh, you're going to have to reapply or recertify every couple months through the IRS might be good. I don't think the IRS can handle it. You know, just my statement on that. I think anytime you open the pool up, you run the risk of opening it up more to abusers. So you know, and this is true with a lot of things. You know, when we look at order of protection statutes, and we look at, you know, do we want to increase the ability to get an order of protection statute, recognizing that the people who are going to be asking for them might be the abusers. So this is the same thing. You're looking to increase the eligibility. Well, then yes, you're going to get people who shouldn't be getting it. And so does the benefit outweigh you know, is there a balance there, and what is the balance? But as for making it more difficult, you know, my first comment is, if you're an unmarried step parent and you can't claim under the IRS, there should be someone, possibly someone who's taking care of that child, who can claim under the IRS. So why are you adding that person with the ability to claim. I mean, if we've eliminated the people who don't have immigration status and allowed them to claim for their children, I don't know what the benefit of opening it up to a possible unmarried step parent would be. But you're right. I do see the benefit of opening it up to people who are taking care of their kin, who couldn't claim under the IRS, or taking care of their friends' kids because their friend is not in a position to take care of them. So I understand what you're saying. I think the question is, does that extra pool of people outweigh the negative that you're going to get? So.
And I would welcome, I'll look in the chat if folks who are have thoughts, because I really view this group as kind of the experts on all of the strategies that abusers take.
I think someone in the chat had a similar question. Claudia, she asked, do foster parents receive the child tax credit? So kind of along the same lines of what we're just discussing. Natanya, I know you have some questions from people you'd like to ask.
Yes. So the foster parent answer is in the chat, so you can look there for that. And then we have 2 questions about the unenrollment system. So the first is there's a client where her ex has falsely claimed the child and forged her signature.
Sorry, Natanya, sorry to cut you off, but it seemed like Tiffany wanted to add something to the last conversation. So if Tiffany adds it, then you can ask your questions.
No, I actually was listening to Natanya's question. The only thing that I was going to say was, as long as, the credit is tied to the taxpayer, it doesn't matter who it is or who it goes to. Just like now, the only difference is now they're advancing it. It's the same thing. It's not tied to the child, because if the custodial parent or the person who is taking care of that dependent doesn't file their taxes, they just don't get it. So, that's important to remember. It's not tied to the child. The IRS, as long as they're the administrators of it, is tied to the taxpayer. Okay. So that's a easier way to think of it. So I think a lot of the advocacy work has to be around filing taxes and how those are filed and how that's done, as opposed to who the person is. So it's going to be access to getting those taxes filed and educating, survivors on their rights and the importance of making sure those things get filed. So that's all. I'm sorry, Natanya.
No worries.
Sorry, Natanya.
Okay, so it's 2 questions about unenrolling. I'm going to read them both just to see maybe the answer is the same or similar. So the first question is, there's a client where her ex has falsely claimed the children and forged her signature and is receiving the advanced monthly payments. Can the client go on to unenroll to prevent the monthly payments from going out to the wrong parent? And then the second question is, if a married couple filed jointly last year, can either of them opt out of the advanced CTC, or would it have to be both of them? And I'm going to put these questions in the chat also.
So for the first one, the individual who did not file the taxes cannot unenroll. They're not even in the system or tied to that. What they could do is they could do fraud, and they could do it that way. And obviously they would stop the payments, again, like I said, and they would investigate and finish that claim. For the joint couple, yes, both of them will have to go on and do that.
And then there's a question that
go ahead.
Yes. So one question that just came into the chat is, if an individual has left their abusive partner, but he's still claiming the children for the purposes of tax and stimulus, what recourse does the survivor have?
Well, potentially several different avenues. I mean, it would depend exactly on how it's presenting itself. But if the person who has left the abusive partner has taken the children with them, one thing that the survivor can do is file their own tax return claiming the children. It's not entirely clear to me where this is fitting in with the advanced child tax credit. It's really hard to do much once someone else is getting the advanced child tax credit to switch it over to you if you're the one who's supposed to be getting it. You can make, there is IRS does have an identity theft procedure if it involved identity theft and forging of signatures, but kind of your best recourse is, if all else fails, is to file your 2021 tax return, as early as possible. If you qualify to claim the children as dependents, claim them and the child tax credit with it, and then, let IRS deal with it after the fact.
They can think about, if they're in a position and want to do this, they can think about filing for child support, and then the tax credit will be dealt with, or should be dealt with, in the child support matter. So that is something. Filing for child support there's a lot of implications to that, and maybe they're not ready to see their abusive partner or ex-partner in court, but it is something to consider as a mechanism to get them some money before the next tax period.
So I have a general question to ask from policy, from the questions we curated. So what policy recommendations do you have for policymakers working on legislation to make, I assume it is, make CTC permanent, extended, to make the CTC more accessible to survivors? So any of the panelists can answer. So policy recommendations for policymakers working on legislation to make the CTC permanent or extended, or make it more accessible for survivors.
I think, again, like I said, just really education on taxes, period. But one of the things that I want the IRS to be flexible on, especially for the survivors that we work with, is the address. That's something that will change a lot. I know that they have to use it so that they know where to send things and paperwork. But some policy put in place for protection around people who don't have the address. They did for the stimulus payments do the tool where people who were homeless were able to put an alternative address to get their stimulus payments. And we definitely need something like that to be accessible to the survivors so that they don't have to be stuck to that one place. Even being able to use some of the shelters in some of those places as addresses would be very helpful. So just some policies put in place around the IRS about how long it takes to get those addresses changed for people to get their benefits.
If nobody has any other thing, just final words to the panelists and then to the participants. Any final comments, mindful of the time?
I would say, because there was a question about policy, you always want to make sure to loop in all vested parties, because there's something that you might want to do and think is a good idea. Someone else might say, well, here are all the problems with that. And how we did here, if you're expanding it for these people, you expand it over here as well. And so CSAJ, I think just come back and circle back with CSAJ after you have some thoughts on policy proposals. But I think that part of it too is just to I am curious to see how this works over this whole year and next year first, and see from there, kind of get information of what have been the successes and the challenges and how can we make it better. So just wait a little bit more time to get more data, because that's how it's really driven. When you propose something, you're going to want data to back it up. You're going to want those stories. You're going to want numbers and figures. So that's, that's my recommendation.
If I was going to make, oh, sorry. Go
No,
ahead,
no, no,
Tiffany.
go ahead, go ahead.
If I was going to make one closing suggestion, it would be this: make sure that the people that you're working with understand that even if the wrong person is getting the advanced child tax credit now, that the right person can still, and in fact must, file a 2021 tax return, claim those children, and can get the child tax credit, the full amount, even if someone else has already gotten the full amount. And it's going to be up to IRS to, figure it out come next spring and summer. But, just because somebody is not getting it as an advance payment does not mean it is not going, that they've missed out. They're still going to get it.
I would also just say that remind all your clients that they should all file taxes if they can. And that they should all file them on January 2nd, the minute they can, the minute they get their W-2 or whatever their statement of income is. Because once it's filed, at least the IRS has it. And then however long it takes to process, at least they know they got it in quickly. But always talk to somebody. There's a lot of low-income taxpayer clinics out there and advocate services, because almost everyone should be filing something in their for their taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Katie and Tiffany?
Yeah. Katie?
Thank you very much. The only one thing, as you were saying that, I was saying, and that's a great time to start talking about the predatory challenges with some of the tax preparers. So have your folks file taxes and have them do it with a clinic if at all possible. So thanks for being here today and for all the amazing work y'all do with survivors.
And
sorry, I was just going to chime in real quick. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's just that there's been a question on the chat about someone saying that she doesn't qualify. I will probably take this back to Janine, but one of the things that you can do is have someone who does tax work request a copy of their file, their credit file, and their history, their tax file and their tax history to see what's being reported, because maybe there is a fraudulent return that the abuser did or something. Like there might be something, and so you need some more information from that. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yep. Well, that's all I wanted to say, except for advocates, get you a tax person or work with the coalition that does free taxes and have them as support for you. You don't have to know it all, like Katie said, but it's good to know people that provide support in that area, especially because it's becoming more of an issue for survivors. So that's the thing. Connect with the United Ways in your area or the places that are doing free tax preparation, and they'll support you.
And your low-income taxpayer clinics.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, everyone. Natanya put an evaluation form. Please help us fill it out. If you have more questions that we didn't get to answer, because we know it's a lot, please send them to us. We would get our experts to answer them for you. We thank you all for attending this town hall. We hope it was useful, and just let us know what you think. Thank you all to the panelists for your time and your efforts. And yeah, everyone have a great day.
And there will probably be more. So as Carla was saying, this is an ongoing learning process. So reach out to us, stay in touch. We'll probably do more of this. We'll engage you. So let us know what you're thinking, what you need, reach out. We're here, and thank you. Thanks, Nkiru.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.